Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me for my weekly live stream. Today, I am taking a break from the normal subjects that we do on Tuesday afternoons. Normally, I do different conversations kind of geared towards men, but I wanted to do a live stream on this subject. I've been wanting to talk about this for a while, and that is just specifically things about the Temple Mount, the political situation there, understanding the old city and how it's all divided up. A lot of this stuff is probably going to be new to a lot of you. Some of you, this might not be the most fascinating topic to you, but it's something that interests me greatly, especially after my last trip to Israel. And I've been doing a lot of research on this subject, looking at a lot of history. And just last week, I saw in the news that there was an assault at the Al-Aqsa mosque by the Israeli army. And what was interesting when I watched the news story about that, I actually understood why it was such a big deal, because I had been reading a lot of things on this, just trying to wrap my mind around it. Who actually owns the Temple Mount? And that's a question I've been asking. And I've looked up a lot of different things on it. And most of the stuff that I was reading wasn't making a whole lot of sense. I finally came across a couple of videos and some articles where it made sense. And I like the way one of the videos started. It's like, if you want to know who owns the Temple Mount, he's like, well, it's complicated. And it is complicated. But when you understand what's going on, if you are interested in all things Israel, if you're interested in things concerning the end times, you can't help but be just a little fascinated with this subject. And so I wanted to talk about this subject because it's something I'm very interested in, something I still have a lot to learn when it comes to this. I'd love to talk to some people on it if they feel like they know this situation real well. I'd love to learn more, but I asked Brother Paul Wittenberger to join me today because he also is someone who is interested in the subject. He spent about 40 days in Israel just last year filming the new documentary, so he's seen a lot, and I know he's also done a documentary called Beyond Jordan, where he talked a lot about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, things that are going on over there. And it is a tricky, confusing situation. And when it comes down to it, when we're trying to understand everything, you've got to understand, and this is what people got to get a hold of, is in America, it's kind of our culture where we are about the facts. We want to know the facts. We want to know reality. That's kind of how we are. Over there, that is not how they operate. It is about tradition. It is about what we believe. It is about, how we feel about these things. And when you have a group, a nation that is made up of Israelis and Palestinians who have very different views, they have very different history. They interpret the facts very differently. And not only that, but you also have a lot of Christian groups. And I use that, when I say that term Christian, I'm not saying saved groups, but that's what they call themselves. And I've been corrected by about 100,000 people on this. But understand, that's how they see themselves. And so what we have is really three different groups with three different traditions, three different histories, three different belief systems, all giving the facts as they see them. And then we're over here in America trying to figure out what's actually what. And I think the key to finding out what's what, you do have to understand where these people are coming from. And then I think it becomes very clear. So I'm going to go ahead and have but it is good to have Brother Paul on here. And so, Brother Paul, what are your thoughts? Do you think you've got it all figured out yet? I mean, you've spent a lot of time in Israel. You did a documentary Beyond Jordan. Would you agree it's a complicated situation over there?
Yeah, I think that's putting it very mildly, that it's complicated because all we really know here in America is through the eyes of Zionism and through the Jewish media. We don't really get to see the Palestinian side of it. And so, when I went over to Palestine and Jordan and to the West Bank, I didn't know kind of how bad it was. I've heard of the stories, but I never really understood it completely. And I still don't understand it because it's a very complicated issue. But there is a real conflict over there, and it's very, very sad.
It is. And what it comes down to, it's hard to know who the players are in this thing too. And that's one thing that I haven't got my mind completely wrapped around, as far as like, all right, who's the ones that are actually pushing the buttons on these things, because it's not even just about the Israeli government, but it is about the world government too. They are very involved in what's going on. And the more I look into this thing too, we've been hearing for a long time about how Israel was rebirthed in 1948. And the more I look into this and the more I understand about the political situation, the more I'm leaning towards just the idea that no, it actually hasn't clearly been established yet. In fact, in our reality, in our Zionist Jewish media controlled world, Israel came back to life in 1948. But what people don't realize is there are many countries that do not recognize that fact, that did not vote in favor of the UN resolution when they established it as a nation, or not even a nation, but a state. A two-state system that they had. There were several countries that didn't vote on it, and even some of the nations that did vote on it, it was one of those things where people talk about how it was a miracle, because it was like, these people were so against Israel, and what made them do this. And there's been a lot of deception when it comes to all things Israel. A lot of the people, when they originally voted in favor of it, they had the wrong idea of what it was going to cause and what was going to happen. And so a lot of them, if they could have done it again, not even a year later, maybe even a week later, they probably would have voted different. And so what you have to understand when you're talking about Israel in America, amongst Christians especially, it is the nation from the Old Testament, from the Bible, that has come back to their land. It was the budding of the fig tree. 1948 was Israel's rebirth. We're in Ezekiel 37. The bodies come back together, but there's no breath of life in it yet because they haven't been saved yet. But no, I don't think that's the case with any of it. And it's just kind of my opinion. I do believe it will come back. I do believe that nation will come back, but I believe it will be with the rise of the Antichrist. And so that's your reality, as an American Zionist who probably calls yourself Judeo-Christian, who watches a lot of Jewish news media, but that is not what they think in other parts of the world. And, and tell everybody a little bit about your Beyond Jordan documentary and kind of the concept behind it, just showing what it's like over there for the Palestinians.
Well, we wanted to make a film called Beyond Jordan that shows all the biblical sites that are not in Israel. So we basically went to Jordan, we went to Palestine, and we toured all the biblical sites that are mentioned in the Bible, and show that there is biblical sites today that exist that are not in Israel, because we wanted to show people that you can view these sites without going to Israel and supporting Israel, for those of you that don't want to support Israel. And, for those that are maybe scared to visit these other countries, because the tour groups, they don't go to these other countries. They don't go into the West Bank to visit a lot of these sites because of the fear that has been propagated on them. And so, so our Beyond Jordan film was to show the conflict. So we also get into the conflict and the borders, and how the road systems are set up, and how they're being slowly taken out of their land that they've had for generations. And so I think it is an amazing film. and very eye-opening. I watched it not too long ago, and I think it still holds up very well today. One of the things in it that I never got to do on that film was visit the Waldorf Hotel, and that is a hotel that's in Israel. Well, it's in yeah, it's in Israel, but it's right on the it's in Palestine. Sorry, it's right on the border between Israel and Palestine. It's right next to the wall that separates the two. And in that museum, they have basically the history of the whole conflict in that museum, and they have a video showing the the travesty of that, and they also have a video showing the history of it. And that museum really brought tears to my eyes, just going through all the different elements of the museum and seeing the true history of that the new state of Israel. And it was really interesting to view that. But that being said, it's still a very complicated issue, and I don't even fully understand how the borders, and I don't even think a lot of the people over there even understand it. They just know that they can't enter in certain places because there's checkpoints, there's it's all blocked off, and they can't even access a lot of the sites
Mm.
and city. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what people need to get a hold of too is, while everybody has opinions about it, and honestly, I'm not even really here today to give my opinion on who the land belongs to, who's in the right or who's in the wrong. I'm just hoping in this video to kind of show the different perspectives that are out there, because that's why there's a conflict. And even though, I mean, your Bible interpretation leads you to believe that the land belongs to the Jews because they're God's chosen people and descendants of Isaac, you know, that's fine. But just understand there's a whole bunch of Palestinians over there who do not agree with you at all, who have been in that land for a very long time and are being slowly choked out of that land, and they've got a problem with it. And so I'm not telling you have to feel sorry for them, but at the same time, just understand they don't agree. They see that land in certain areas as belonging to them, and they're not going to go anywhere without a fight. But there's even Christian groups over there that kind of claim ownership of that land. And so what I want to do right now, I want to start showing some videos. This wasn't really in our news that much, but I do want to show. Yeah, I want to play some videos of the different, I guess I should say the storming of the Al-Aqsa compound. In fact, before we do that, let me just go ahead and read this article for you. This is Israel's perspective here. I'm gonna give you both perspectives, but here's Israel's perspective. This was on timesofisrael.com, but it says police said they entered the mosque, talking about the Al-Aqsa mosque, after masked youths barricaded themselves inside the mosque atop the Temple Mount with fireworks, clubs, and rocks, and refused to come out peaceably. Cops apparently believed the group intended to assault Jews visiting the Mount on Passover Eve. And so right now, last week, and they were in their holy month Ramadan, which is like the most holy month for the Muslims. But this year too, you have Ramadan and you have Passover and you have Easter. They're all kind of at the same time. So all the three Abrahamic religious groups, as they call them, are all meeting together, are drawn to those same places. And so the Israeli police, they got really upset when the Muslims stayed in the Al-Aqsa Mosque past the time that they were supposed to, because they were afraid they were going to assault Jews, and there was going to be a bunch of Jews going up on the Temple Mount because of the Passover. And it's important that you understand the political situation of the Temple Mount, because that's really complicated too. But they knew this was going to be a rough week, because this is like Holy Week for the three different groups. And so the police said they tried to convince the rioters inside the mosque to leave, but the group failed to comply, leaving security forces no option but to enter the mosque, where they were attacked with rocks and fireworks. Israel is committed to preserving freedom of worship, free access for all religions, and the status quo on the Temple Mount, and will not allow violent extremists to change this, Netanyahu wrote. Police added 350 suspects were detained and that the rioters caused damage to the mosque and desecrated it. And the Arab League Security General Ahmad Abdul Gait described Israel's actions as irresponsible, adding that the behavior affects the religious feelings of millions of Muslims around the world, especially during Ramadan. The Islamic holy month of Ramadan, which this year once again coincides with the Jewish festival of Passover, is known to be a period of higher tension between Israeli forces and Palestinians. And so we'll stop reading right there, but let's go ahead and show a few videos. And so understand the Al-Aqsa Mosque is the third most holy site in all of Islam. You've got Mecca, that's the most holy, and then Medina, and then the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is on what they would call the Al-Aqsa compound, which is where you see the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is not the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's way off to the left in the corner, but it's on what the Jews call the Temple Mount complex, or and Christians typically call it that too. But the Muslims call that entire complex Al-Aqsa. Okay. Now, I personally call it all the ancient Roman fortress Antonia, but we're going to leave my opinion out of this. So the Israeli police raiding the Al-Aqsa Mosque like that is a huge, huge insult to the Islamic people. And so let's go ahead and play a couple clips of this.
العيادة عيادة الأقصى مدمرة.
يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله.
All right. Had you seen any of that stuff in the news, Brother Paul?
No, I didn't. This is the first time watching it. Wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing how stuff can happen like that is so amazing, and then we never hear about it over here. That just shows you the disconnect.
I heard a quick reference to it on the radio, and that got me to look it up, and I'm just like, I couldn't believe it wasn't in the news more. But this is a really big, it is a really big thing. I've got this one picture on here you can see of, I mean, look at all of them. I mean, this is one of their most holy places, and look at all of them laying down face first, hogtied like that. I mean, just imagine how we as Christians would feel if we saw pictures like that of people gathering for worship, like during COVID. If pictures like that would have got out of us laying on the ground, being arrested, I mean, obviously people would be very offended by that. And again, I'm not giving an opinion here. I'm giving perspective. And so from the Muslim perspective, the Israelis invaded their holy site and assaulted a bunch of Muslims and arrested. It was I believe 400 they arrested. I think there was 20 some that were injured. There were stories too about how the Israeli military was blocking the ambulances. In fact, I saw one video. In fact, it was right outside. I forgot which gate it was, where you had parked that one time when we were taking a bunch of equipment in, and then you left me. It was in that gate.
Right. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And yeah, they weren't letting them get in there. You can see all that damage that was done, and they blame the Israeli armies for that. Okay. Now, the Israeli perspective of that. So, and here's where it starts getting complicated, because who actually owns the Temple Mount? That's what I think that's what everybody's trying to figure out, and what people often don't understand. And I'm going to have a graphic come up here, and I want to show everybody something. I think a lot of Christians don't realize this, but check this out. So this is like a map of the old city, Jerusalem. And you'll notice there in the top right, you've got that Muslim quarter that's the biggest in brown there. And then you've got the Dome of the Rock, Al-Aqsa Mosque section there in kind of a yellow. And then you've got the Jewish quarter in the blue. But then also there is an Armenian quarter that's there in purple. And then above that is the Christian quarters. And again, I've been corrected by about 6,000 people when I talked about how the Christian quarter was the most idolatrous part of Old City Jerusalem. Like, those are Catholics, they aren't Christians. And it's like, I get that, but that is known as the Christian quarter. And that's where you have like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You've got, the Via Dolorosa. A lot of the Christian holy sites are all in that section. And so when it comes to how that's all divided up, okay, how long has it been that way? Who decided that it was that way? And that's what I was trying to figure out, and I didn't understand, is, who do these areas actually belong to? And it wasn't after World War I, the Ottoman Empire were the ones that had kind of controlled Israel and the Temple Mount and all that area. But then the British actually took it over after World War I, and they kind of had control of that area and were in charge. But then after World War II, you had earlier in the 1900s, you had the Balfour Declaration. We started seeing the Zionist movement really get started in the late 1800s. And then eventually, during 1948, when Israel became a nation, that caused a war. And then the Jordanians, they were actually the ones that kind of ended up taking control of the Temple Mount area. The Jews were not even allowed to go to like the Wailing Wall. They were kind of barred from the city. But then in 1967, you had the 6-Day War. That a lot of people are familiar with, the 6-Day War. And in the 6-Day War, it was actually the Israelis who ended up taking over the entire Old City. And they actually ended up taking over the Temple Mount. There's a famous line in Hebrew where they announced, the Temple Mount is in our hands. And people just went nuts. The Jewish community went nuts when they got a hold of that. They were so excited. They finally got their land. Well, even though Israelis got control of it, there was a ton of pressure from the global community, because this was going to greatly outrage the Islamic world. And so they were kind of forced or pressured into giving the Temple Mount back, or control of the Temple Mount back to the Muslims. And then that's when they ended up kind of getting a hold of the Wailing Wall. A lot of what you see there in Old City Jerusalem, it's stuff that's been rebuilt, repaired since the 6-Day War. And so what we have now, and what we've had going on since 1967, is what they refer to as the status quo. It's like the situation as is. It's never clearly been established. There's not like some official decree or something out there showing that, what all the rules are exactly. But what we have is the Jews, they technically see themselves as, they're owner of the Temple Mount. And the way the Muslims put it, and they don't like this and they don't agree with it, but one of the things they don't like about the Israelis is the Israelis see themselves as their landlords. And they find that offensive because they're like, no, this land belongs to us. And so, but the Israelis are like, no, actually it belongs to us, and we will let you all worship up there, but there are certain rules. There's certain times of day when visitors are supposed to be allowed to come up there, and Jews are allowed to go up there. It's just no one's allowed to pray. That's not a Muslim. You're not allowed to wear religious symbols. You know, you got to be dressed a certain way if you're going to go up there. And then what they have is the Jordanians, they are considered like the custodians of the Temple Mount, and they actually hire out the Islamic Waqf to police things up there. But the Israelis, they also claim the right to send their police up there if they need to. So the reason this was so offensive, what happened is a bunch of radical Muslims did go into the Al-Aqsa mosque, and they did end up barricading themselves in there. They took a bunch of fireworks and rocks and things that they were going to use to fight off the Israeli army, but they decided they were going to stay in there all night because of Ramadan. And so technically the Islamic police should have taken care of it, but the Israelis are like, nope, we're taking care of it. So they came in, and then they busted the door down. The Muslims tried fighting them off the best they could. The Israelis were shooting them with rubber bullets, beating the tar out of them with batons and stuff, and ended up doing a lot of damage. A lot of people got hurt, and a bunch of people were arrested as a result of it. So the thing is, while the Muslims were breaking the rules, you know, the Israelis feel like, well, they broke the rules, we're able to come in. But the problem is the Muslims don't really agree that the Israelis have the right to come in there. But they did it, and it makes everybody mad. So it's kind of like what we had going on in 2020. You know, does the government have the right to tell a church that they can't, that they can't meet together? And, and so you had churches that are like, the government doesn't have a right to tell us what to do. We're going to do what we do. But then you had certain places where like, no, we do have the right to come in there. And they were doing stuff to these churches, and it was very offensive, and it created a lot of legal problems. But at the end of the day, we have a pretty good system to a certain extent here where things will go through the courts, and, the government lost in most cases where things were battled. The problem is in Israel, there aren't clear rules, and there's kind of understandings. There's the status quo. And when Israel ends up breaking the rules in the Muslims' eyes, there's really nobody to enforce anything on them. And so what we're seeing go on is we've got two completely different belief systems living amongst each other. And then what you have the Israelis constantly doing things to provoke the Muslims, constantly doing things to just kind of demoralize them, to upset them. And then when the Muslims do something, what do the world community do? Oh man, we got to do something about them Muslims. But at the same time, they're kind of pushing them. And so, and Brother Paul, in your documentary, you guys, you showed a lot of what they're putting these people through, but it's like, who's going to enforce things? And in reality, it's like Israel, they'll do just enough unless it's going to cause like other countries to get involved. And they know they can't push things too far. And one of the reasons they're able to do as much as they do is because they have the support of the United States. We're always supporting them, but there's even pressures in our country because, when things go crazy in the Islamic world, it affects oil prices. It affects things in other countries. So does this make sense, what I'm explaining to you? Do you have any questions about that?
No, it makes total sense. And, that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is really a microcosm of that whole area.
Mm-hmm.
The West Bank it's all owned and controlled by Israel. They are the landlord of the entire piece, it seems like, and they really dictate everything. Even like in Bethlehem, they don't give them funding. They penalize them. They're not allowed to take care of their own streets. That's why a lot of the pollution, the polluting and stuff happens, because they don't even have like trash pickups and stuff like that. There's a lot of things that is like that, and I think that is a perfect microcosm of that whole area. And landlord is the perfect description.
Yeah, it is, and they are, and it's clearly a slow process to just demoralize these people, and again, and it's like they know if we do anything, for one, they don't have a lot of power because the Israelis have all the weapons, they've got all the guns. I mean, we saw that when we were over there. I mean, Israeli citizens can carry assault rifles pretty much wherever they go, but the Palestinians can't. And right. So the thing is, if they decide they're going to fight, it's going to be a bloodbath. And the only way they're going to win is if they get help from the other Muslim countries. But then if that happens, you're going to have America get involved. You're going to have a lot of other countries all get involved. And it really is going to be a huge thing. And so it's just like over time, Israel is just slowly, they're slowly winning these things.
They're taking over more and more, step by step. They're taking over more land, and they do it in a way that's very subtle. Like, for instance, we visited. I messed up my rental car a little bit, and we had to take it into a shop. And the guy was saying that the place there in Jerusalem, he was saying how he cannot add on anything to his shop. He can't add on another room. He can't even fix it up without a permit. And he definitely can't live there on his own property. He can't live in the place at all. He says no permits are you can apply for a permit, but they will never approve you unless you're an Israeli citizen. And so that's what they're doing. They're slowly buying out all the land, piece by piece, and getting people into littler and tighter sections of the West Bank. It's very sad.
And they've been doing that too since the late 1800s. That was when they really started trying to get over there. It was when, during the Ottoman Empire, they were having a lot of problems in different parts of the world. So they were trying to get run out. And so that's when the Zionist movement got started. A lot of them started going in there. They started buying land, and they were buying land that was, really crummy land. But they had the technology and things, and that where they started irrigating it and actually making the land valuable. And so the Muslims were selling them all this land real cheap, and then they would kind of make it valuable. It's kind of the whole, give a Jew a hubcap and I'll have a car dealer within 6 months. And they have always been very resourceful in that area. And so it got to the point where there were so many of them coming in, and they were kind of becoming so powerful that a lot of Muslims kind of started throwing a fit. And then when England took over, they started doing things to kind of limit Jews from coming in to the land, to kind of keep the peace with the Palestinians. And that's the thing, everybody who's ever had control of that land, it's always just been a big battle to just keep things calm. And what nobody talks about, it's always about the Jews and the Muslims, but there's a Christian element to it over there too, where you have the Christian quarters, you have the Armenian quarters, which in Armenian, they claim to be the first church, that goes all the way back to St. James, and they're very much like the Orthodox and or Catholic. I don't even know for sure like what their specific beliefs are, but the country Armenia was supposed to be like one of the first countries that converted to Christianity. And they claim to have had this area over there going all the way back to the 1st century. In reality, it was probably the 4th century. But again, don't question their beliefs. Don't question their traditions, even if the facts aren't on their side. But after the 6 Day War, I mean, the Israelis took control of the Christian sections too. They actually took over the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which that has been a major site for the Christian world since, Constantine got a hold of it in the 4th century. And they decided that that was where Jesus died and was buried and rose again. And, that's another story for another day. I might do I want to do a video one of these days just about the history of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, because it is interesting. But, but yeah, so after that whole thing happened where they took the old city, that was one of the things they had to do too. They had to give back the keys of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, to the churches that occupy it. And so basically what we see there today is you have, nobody's happy with their current situation, but nobody's shooting at each other right now. So it's one of those things where, things will be peaceful, but typically every once in a while something happens and gets everybody fired up. And so, the Jews, they see the Temple Mount as theirs. They want it, but they're not taking it over right now. So, Muslims will be quiet. And there's been a lot of stories too in the news where different Israeli dignitaries and stuff have gone on to the Temple Mount. And anytime they do that, that is kind of seen as Israel making a claim to that area, which always infuriates the Muslims. And so that's why too it was a big deal a few years ago when Trump declared Jerusalem the capital of Israel. That was a nation, again, showing we stand with the Jews. Whereon, we side with their facts. We side with their tradition and with their history. And so the Muslims, they throw a big fit over that. But the truth is, we're saying that, but that doesn't make it reality. And what Israel actually is, it's an occupation. It would be like if the Chinese came to America and their military started getting control of certain things. Now most Americans would probably just roll over and say, well, I guess we're China now. But there'd be a lot of people that'd be like, no, this is America. And while China would be like enforcing some of their rules and their laws, we'd have a lot of people in our country saying, no, it's the Constitution. That's the law of the land. And, and some of us, we would do stuff against the Chinese rules. We'd be called terrorists as a result of that. But at the same time, what we'd have two different major belief system in this, in this area. And at the end of the day, who's right? I guess whoever's in charge, whoever's the strongest. So that's what's going on in Israel today. And this is another reason I want to have you on here too. But this is why I think this documentary, this temple documentary coming out, is really important. But that is because imagine what would happen if the Jews admitted that the temple was never on the Al-Aqsa compound. If they did that, then what that would make all the Muslims say, and a lot of the world would agree, then that would make them say, well, then you don't need this. This is ours. Leave us alone. You shouldn't have any say about what goes on up here. And he said, all they wanted to do, last week was they just wanted to stay all night in there. They wanted to go past hours because it was the, holy month of Ramadan, but Israelis like, no. And so, when you realize that the Temple Mount, the quote unquote Temple Mount is not the real place, then that's just when you're like, yeah, you know what? All of this battle we're fighting, it's not based on facts. This is a religious war. This is a war of traditions. And it really is a lot of foolishness. And it's pretty sad how much American Christians get caught up in it. So,
right. Yeah, and they're slowly taking over that whole chunk right by the Temple Mount area. They're getting more and more real estate every year. When we were there in December, very very interesting thing happened to us when we were walking through trying to go to the wet tunnels. My dad and I were gonna go through the wet tunnels. We went to go buy a ticket at the City of David area, and they said, "Oh, the wet tunnels are closed today." And we were like, "Oh, okay. Are they going to be open tomorrow?" And they're like, "Well, we're not sure if they're going to be open tomorrow. They're not open right now." So, anyways, we left and we tried to leave, and all the roads were blocked off, and we're like, "What in the world is going on?" And then we ended up going up to the Temple Mount complex, coming back later, trying to do that wet tunnel later on in the day because they said it might possibly be open later on the day. So we came back and they were like, no, actually, it's going to be closed for a while because of the tensions, the conflicts that are happening right now in the city of David because of a land dispute. And so what happened was the Baron Rothschild ended up buying a lot of the city of David, which is right off of the Temple Mount complex. Back in the day, he bought a lot of the land up, which he donated to Israel when he died. But there's still chunks that he was never able to acquire. So parts of near the city of David were owned by the Muslims still. And so what just happened that day I was there was the courts, the city of David bought actually a piece of real estate right next to them to excavate the Pool of Siloam. It's that whole area. Half of the Pool of Siloam is owned by Israel, and the other half is totally not excavated at all. It's owned by the Muslims. And so it was a historic moment that day that the courts ruled that it is now Israel's. So they bought that up, and the guy was saying in his court, he was saying that he was pressured into signing these papers, and he thought that they were gonna kill him. That's what the city of David person said, that they were forced into signing over the paperwork because they were scared for their life, and that they were trying to fight it and say like they didn't want to sell this land, but they were pressuring them so much and so hard that they felt like they had no other choice but to sell. And so the courts ruled that is now not their land. So that day, I guess they went into all the houses, rounded up everyone, and forced them out of that area. And so now Israel owns all of that Pool of Siloam. They own all of that, the whole city of David area. So now they're able to excavate the rest of that Pool of Siloam, which they said will be done next year, which is very interesting.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. In these courts, they're Israeli courts, and Israel keeps winning against the Palestinians in all these court cases. And so it's just one more thing to demoralize the Palestinians. And, eventually it's all going to, either blow up and what they'll do, it's kind of like what they're doing in America today. They're doing everything they can to demoralize conservatives. They're trying to get somebody on the right to go shoot up a place, do some kind of domestic terror attack. That way they can say, see, we've got to stop these Christians. We got to stop these, right wingers, so we can take their guns. And that's what they're doing over in Israel today. They're trying to get these people to do something violent so they can have an excuse to just go and kind of, take everything. And it's just like, you can only put up with so much. And, how much are these people going to put up with? In America, I think we would be smart to kind of pay attention to what's going on over there, because, we don't want them trying to provoke us to do something violent, and, we don't want to, we don't want to live in a nation like that. But that's exactly how it is over there. And so it would just be, that's why they will never admit that the city of David is where the Temple Mount was. There's no way they're going to admit it. There's been too much that has happened. There's been too much bloodshed. And so, they'll never do it. At the end of the day, this is about control. It's about getting power. In their mind, it all belongs to them. But what they've got to do, they've got to get the world, on their side with these things. And you know what? These Zionist Christians out there, promoting all the Zionist foolishness is not really helping the situation.
Right.
And it's really frustrating to listen to that. And it's like, well, you're siding with the Palestinians. I just think America ought to stay out of it, because I think it's just, both groups are wicked. And at the end of the day, when Israel fully, gets everything, it's going to be, when the Antichrist comes into power. And I don't think we ought to support Antichrist coming into power.
It's hard to feel bad for. I mean, it's you feel bad for these people because they're making it so hard for them to live in their own land. They're making it impossible to park. They're making it impossible to do anything, to expand their business, to make money, to grow. And then they come in and offer them millions and millions of dollars for this tiny little piece of land. And they're like, oh, if I sell it, then, I can live the rest of my life and be totally set.
Mm-hmm.
So, you feel bad, but you see why they're able to take over, but there's still a lot of people holding out and saying that they're not going to sell.
Right. Yeah. And, it is interesting because, I'm not from the Islamic world, but, I did notice when I was over there, it does seem that a lot of your Palestinians are becoming very secular in a lot of ways. And I do think that's part of what they need to do. If you can get these people not caring about their religion enough, well, then money could get rid of them. Difficult times could get them out of their land. And at the end of the day, too, what I wish Christians could get a hold of is the fact that, there is no reason for us to be so connected to a land, and nobody's talking about the fact, too. It's like, the Muslims, they need to give back their land. Well, what about the Christians occupying the old city? The Christians have 2/4, of the old city. So why aren't we talking about getting rid of them? And you know what? And trust me, Israel doesn't want them there either. They don't think they have claim to it either, but they also know they need the Christian world on their side. So they're not going to alienate the Catholics right now. They're not going to go persecute, the Catholics and the Armenians and all that right now. No, they're going to take care of the Muslims. And once they take care of the Muslims, then they'll start taking care of the Christians. And, there was a lot of talk too about a couple of guys, I think, on Netanyahu's cabinet who tried to get a law passed that you couldn't mention the name of Jesus, in Jerusalem, kind of during some of their holy times and stuff, which is crazy ridiculous. You have all these Christian sites where people go to see things that involve Jesus, but they weren't allowed to say his name. And that was it was a very minority part of their government. But there's a lot of things are actually not very stable. There's a lot of protests that have been going on in Tel Aviv right now because Netanyahu's back in charge and a lot of people don't like him. So, and there's always a lot of stuff going on over there. And I've gotten to the point where it's like I don't normally pay a whole lot of attention to it just because it's like I always feel like it's the prophecy people hyping everything up, which it is a lot of times. But I think one of the reasons a lot of people aren't real interested in it is because they don't understand the situation. And I did see, I literally had just watched 2 different videos that to me explained the situation where it made a lot of sense. Because when I was trying to understand what was going on, it was one of those deals where everybody's trying to present the situation in a way that's not offensive to the Jews or the Muslims. But again, reality can be offensive to certain groups. It's offensive. That's why the city of David can't be, where the temple was. That's offensive. How dare you say that? But it's like, but wait, we're Americans. We supposedly as a people like to deal in facts. And and especially as independent fundamental Bible believing Baptists, we believe, the word of God is, as what, that's reality to us, but tradition is reality in these other worlds. And on your documentary too, I know you had talked about possibly putting traditions in the name somewhere, but do you think you're going to be able to cover a lot of the stuff about just Jewish tradition and everything in the documentary?
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk a lot about tradition and how that plays a big role into why they believe that the Temple Mount is where it is. But yeah, it is going to be solely based on, the movie is going to be just based on the city of David debate on where the temple is. But it's going to be an amazing film. I cannot wait till it's done. I've been working hard over here. There's a lot that still needs to be done, but I'm slowly plugging away at it, and every month, so we get closer.
Cool. So are you still considering possibly entering it in maybe some film festivals, or do you have any plans on kind of how you're going to get it out there?
Yeah, I think that would be an awesome way to do it, is to release it to some film festivals. We're also going to be hopefully distributing it through Bob Cornuke's company, Koine House. So, if all goes well, that's going to be distributed through there, and we'll hopefully as well release it into some film festivals, because it would be awesome to get this into some Israeli film festivals. So I have to go. I have to figure out ways to do it. The problem with doing film festivals is it usually delays the release, because they don't want a movie to be out there any other way but their film festival. So it would delay the release substantially. So that is something I'm trying to figure out right now of what I'm going to do. But right now, I'm not even worried about any of that. I'm just trying to get it done.
Yeah, and I'm real excited about, Bob Cornuke's involvement. Did you make it out to Arizona yet for?
Not yet. He called me yesterday, but I was working with our church doing photos for Easter stuff. And so I didn't answer the phone call, but hopefully we'll get that set up soon, because there's definitely a few pickup shots I wanted to get. But I can do it without those pickup shots. Totally. I have everything I need. But this is just a very interesting topic.
Yeah. And I'm amazed. I didn't realize, how interested people were in this subject. I know I've been interested in it for a long time. It's something that matters to me, but yeah, there's a lot of people that care about this. There's a lot of people that know, the truth about it. Cause the thing, there's a lot of videos out there, explaining a lot of this stuff. But there's not been anything put together professionally, something that's real well done. And
with the King James, that's
yes.
my biggest problem, is a lot of stuff doesn't use the King James, which I mean, I don't know how anyone puts their faith in something that is different. That's why I feel like it's so important to get this information out there with the King James Bible. That's my major push to why I want to do it.
Right. Yeah. And the thing that I'm really anxious to see, and I hope this message is one that comes through clearly on there too. But one thing that I've definitely never seen anyone do on this subject is explain why we don't need another temple, and explain why the temple went away. And
Right.
that's really important to understand, because when you understand that, you also understand why I think God made it so we don't know where all these things took place. Because when you look at the battle that is being fought over there, I mean, think about how much of our world is affected by what takes place in that little hunk of real estate over there, when in reality it shouldn't matter. It really shouldn't matter. God wanted people, Jesus wanted people that would worship him in spirit and in truth. He said the day was going to come where they're not going to say, worship him in this mountain. But yet, even Christians, are just drawn to these places in ways that are kind of unhealthy. So I don't think there's anything wrong with being interested in the place where something happened. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But it's definitely not something that we should shed blood over. It's not something that you should be willing to die for, and it's definitely not something that you need to have a close relationship with Christ. The fact that we can go over to Israel and visit a lot of these locations, in reality, it's just kind of a blessing and a privilege and a neat experience. But at the end of the day, if the Israelis ever fully take over and are just like, you know what, Christians are banned from Israel, and you're going to have to renounce Christ to even come over here. It's like, well, I'm just not going there then, because I don't have to go there. I like that I can, but whether I do or I don't, I don't need to find Noah's Ark to believe in Noah's Ark, and I don't need to find the tomb, the cross, any of those things in order to believe them and to have the relationship with God that I need to have. And those things were temporary, and it's supposed to be about the spiritual. And so it is. It's pretty weird that there is a pretty strong Christian. There's a Christian occupation over there too, and I'll tell you that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, I think that would be an interesting documentary right there. Just the history of that place is. I've looked a lot into that. It's really interesting. I wish I'd have known a lot of the stuff when I was there before. I'd probably have appreciated it more. But then too, just the way 3 different churches are kind of occupying that one church. You've got 3 different churches occupying it, and it's one of those things too, where none of them agree with the situation, but you've got the status quo, you've got the situation as is right now, and so people aren't shooting at each other and fighting, and so it just is what it is. And one of the guys here at church, the way he kind of explained it too, that made sense, is he said, you remember, was it Chaz out west in Oregon, where a bunch of those hipsters, communists, went and took over that part of Portland or Seattle, maybe it was Seattle, and they just kind of declared it the something autonomous zone. I forgot what it was called.
I don't know.
It was a big thing a couple years ago in the news, but it was one of those things where they went and they took over this area, declared it this autonomous zone. Obviously, our government didn't agree with it, but they also didn't want to just go in there and kill all of them. And so it was just kind of a waiting game, and eventually it all fell apart. But in what's going on over in Israel, I mean, some of these standoffs have been going on for hundreds of years, and they're not going anywhere without a lot of blood being shed. And so it's a fascinating thing. I think the area is interesting. I think the politics of it is all interesting, and it is a fun thing to watch. I'm interested in the locations, and I can't wait to see the documentary again, just to be able to watch the locations. And I encourage folks, like I said, if you could donate to the project, I've got a link in the description of the video, and be a part of it. It's gonna be good for sure. I know the content's gonna be good. The shots are gonna look great, and just pray that the Lord can, find a way we can really get it out there in a big way so it can have an impact on a lot of people. And hopefully it will,
Yeah.
some of the things that will help people doctrinally too.
And I think this movie won't get, banned on a lot of platforms. So I think this has a potential to reach a really large audience with a, great message, a true message. And so I think it's going to be very unique kind of film, something a little different than what I've made in the past.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree. And there's a lot of stuff out there covering some of the same stuff that's, it's not been taken down. It's got quite a few views. And so whether it be too controversial to go mainstream, I don't know. It's really hard to say, but I'm really praying the Lord will use it in a big way. But anyway, well, I appreciate you joining me for this conversation. Again, this is a subject that I am fascinated with. I'm very interested in, and it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it is something I enjoy looking into. I do hope to do some more videos in the future about some of the other places and locations. It's really interesting, and it just as Americans, I don't think we realize just how different some cultures are, and it really does help if you understand how they think, where they're coming from and stuff. Not because we're looking to find agreement. Obviously we're not going to agree, but I do want to understand where they're coming from and what's going on. And so as I've looked into a lot of these things, it's really helped me. So when I was over in Israel, I didn't even know about the Christian quarters and Armenian quarters and all that. I remember seeing the signs for that, and I'm like, what is this? What is this all about? And it's been real interesting to kind of understand. Bob Cornuke told us a lot about the stuff that's going on with the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that I thought was really interesting. And so it's just sparked my interest. And so I wanted to share this for anybody else out there who might be interested. If you were interested in this subject, you will definitely be interested in the Temple documentary coming out for sure. You definitely want to see that. So anyway, thank you all for watching, and we will see you all next time.
Thanks, guys.